When we look at the state of the world today, it is undeniable that we are living through a period of profound uncertainty. Trade corridors that once seemed unshakable are being disrupted, global alliances are shifting almost overnight, and financial markets respond less to long-term stability and more to sudden jolts of fear or opportunity. At first glance, such instability might appear purely as a threat to growth, as if turmoil automatically signals decline. But history teaches us something different. Crisis often acts as a hidden catalyst. It shakes old certainties, dismantles outdated dependencies, and forces nations to look beyond what is familiar. For India, this moment of global turbulence is not only a challenge, but also an opening to redirect its trajectory toward new markets and fresh possibilities. Think about it. When the environment around us becomes unstable, the instinctive reaction is often retreat, seeking safety in what is known. Yet nations that rise in turbulent times are those that resist the comfort of retreat and instead use uncertainty as fuel for reinvention. India has recognized that clinging solely to its traditional trade partners, no matter how reliable they have been in the past, risks entrapment in the very instability it is trying to avoid. Dependence can be dangerous when the world order itself is in flux. This is why India's vision today is not to merely survive global uncertainty, but to treat it as an accelerator, an opportunity to explore new geographies, new partnerships, and even new definitions of trade itself. There is a psychological dimension here that cannot be ignored. Turmoil compels a kind of mental reset. It disrupts habitual ways of thinking, both for individuals and for nations. Just as personal crises can force us to question our priorities, global economic crises push nations to re-examine the foundations of their strategies. For India, this means asking uncomfortable but necessary questions. Should we continue to rely heavily on markets that are vulnerable to geopolitical tensions? Should we allow external disruptions to dictate the rhythm of our economic growth? Or should we instead treat instability as a signal that the time has come to break free from limited horizons and to engage the world in a broader, more diversified way? This is why the search for new markets is not just an economic decision, but a philosophical one. It reflects a deeper recognition that growth must be anchored in flexibility, not in rigidity. Stability in an unstable world does not mean clinging to what is fragile. It means expanding into spaces where potential outweighs risk, where opportunity outweighs dependence. In this sense, the turmoil of our times is paradoxically providing India with its greatest chance to redefine itself as a global economic actor, not by waiting for the storm to pass, but by learning to move skillfully within the storm itself. And so, the lesson is clear: what appears as instability is often an invitation to evolution. For India, the question is no longer whether it can withstand the turbulence of global markets, but whether it can transform that turbulence into momentum. The answer will not be found in hesitation, but in courage, in vision, and in the willingness to step beyond the familiar. The storm, after all, is not only a threat, it is also the wind that can carry a nation further than it ever imagined. When we speak about economics, we often reduce it to numbers, growth rates, trade balances, reserves, or deficits. But beneath those figures lies something far less visible, yet far more decisive: the psychology of resilience. Nations, like individuals, are tested not in moments of calm, but in times of disruption. What determines whether they rise or collapse is not only their resources, but the way they respond mentally, the narrative they tell themselves in the face of uncertainty. India's current trajectory is a reminder that resilience is not born out of abundance. It is born out of an ability to adapt, to absorb shocks, and to reimagine possibilities when the ground beneath seems unstable. Think of resilience as the muscle of a collective mindset. It is built over centuries of experiences, of colonization, of economic hardship, of global exclusion, and later of gradual integration. India has lived through moments when its voice in the global economy was muted, and yet it found ways to persist. That persistence has now crystallized into something more profound, a cultural instinct to endure while also reinventing. This is why, in today's climate of global turmoil, India does not collapse into despair. Instead, it leans on its reservoir of patience, resourcefulness, and the deep-seated belief that disruption is not the end of the story, but the opening of a new chapter. Philosophically, resilience is about perspective. Two nations may face the same external shock, say a trade war, a supply chain disruption, or a financial crisis, and yet respond in completely different ways. One may see only threat and spiral into paralysis. The other may recognize the same disruption as a chance to step away from dependency and move toward autonomy. The difference lies not in the scale of the challenge, but in the mental framework with which the challenge is approached. India has increasingly chosen the latter path. It interprets turmoil not as a ceiling, but as a signal to expand its thinking, to diversify its trade maps, and to cultivate strength precisely where others see weakness. And let us not forget that resilience is contagious. When a society believes that it can navigate difficulty, it fosters confidence among investors, partners, and even competitors. Resilience projects stability, even in unstable times. This is perhaps why India continues to attract attention from across the world, not because it has avoided turbulence, but because it has demonstrated the ability to absorb turbulence without losing its direction. That is the deeper psychology behind its current search for new markets. It is not a desperate scramble for alternatives, but a measured, almost philosophical stance that growth must be pursued regardless of circumstances. In this sense, India is teaching us a lesson far beyond economics. True resilience is not about avoiding difficulty, but about developing the inner architecture to turn difficulty into strength. And this is a principle that applies not only to nations, but to each of us as individuals. When we encounter disruption in our own lives, the question is not whether the world is turned against us, but whether we can cultivate the inner resilience to see within that disruption a seed of renewal. For India and for each of us, resilience is not just survival, it is the quiet determination to transform adversity into advantage. For too long, India's economic ties have been concentrated within a relatively narrow band of traditional partners, markets that provided familiarity, predictability, and a sense of security. Yet the danger of such dependence becomes evident when those very markets fall into turbulence. What happens when an economy leans too heavily on a few corridors of exchange and those corridors are suddenly blocked or weakened? The answer is vulnerability. And vulnerability, in today's fractured world order, is a luxury no nation can afford. This recognition has led India toward a more deliberate strategy of diversification, one that seeks to balance the weight of long-established partners with the promise of emerging regions. The logic is both practical and philosophical. Practically, it reduces risk. No single disruption can derail the broader trajectory of growth if trade is spread across multiple geographies. Philosophically, it signals maturity, the maturity to understand that strength comes not from clinging to one source of stability, but from weaving stability across a wider network. Consider Africa. For decades, it was viewed by much of the world merely as a recipient of aid or as an untapped reserve of raw resources. Today, Africa is increasingly seen as a continent of opportunity, with rising urban centers, youthful demographics, and economies eager for partnerships beyond the traditional Western orbit. India, with its own history of struggle against colonial exploitation, approaches Africa not just as a marketplace, but as a partner in shared growth. The psychological bridge here is important. Relationships built on mutual respect often carry greater longevity than those driven purely by transactional gain. Then there is Latin America, a region geographically distant, yet surprisingly aligned with India in terms of aspirations and challenges. Countries there, like India, have grappled with inequality, resource dependence, and the complexities of balancing local identities with global integration. To engage Latin America is to extend beyond geography into a philosophical kinship, recognizing that economic exchange is also cultural exchange, and that trust built between societies can outlast the volatility of financial cycles. Southeast Asia, too, offers a compelling case. With its strategic proximity and dynamic economies, it represents not just a natural extension of India's trade routes, but also a testing ground for deeper regional integration. Here again, the lesson is clear. Resilience is not built in isolation, but in interconnection. By strengthening bonds with neighbors who share both geography and history, India reinforces the architecture of regional stability, which in turn enhances its global standing. What unites all these moves is the recognition that diversification is not only about spreading risk, but about expanding vision. It is a mindset that refuses to be trapped in the limitations of the past, that dares to imagine economic relationships beyond the predictable. In many ways, this is an act of intellectual courage to see in distant geographies not obstacles but opportunities, not strangers but potential allies. And so, India's pivot toward emerging regions is more than trade strategy. It is a philosophy of engagement with the world, grounded in the understanding that security lies not in the comfort of the familiar, but in the courage to expand horizons. The lesson is timeless. Dependence weakens, but diversity strengthens. And only those who dare to look beyond the narrow circle of certainty can ever hope to build true resilience. When people think of India's role in global trade, they often picture the familiar: textiles, spices, agriculture, or perhaps the vast pool of skilled labor in information technology. These images, though accurate in part, no longer capture the full story of what India is becoming. The truth is that India is undergoing a profound shift in how it defines its economic identity. It is not content to remain simply a provider of goods or services. It seeks to present itself as a creator of solutions, an innovator that offers the world more than products. It offers possibilities. This transformation is most visible in technology. Over the past 2 decades, India has built one of the largest digital infrastructures in the world, connecting millions through platforms that integrate banking, commerce, and public services into a single accessible ecosystem. What is striking is not only the scale but the philosophy behind it. India is proving that innovation need not be the privilege of wealthy societies alone. It can be inclusive, affordable, and tailored to the needs of ordinary people. This is the kind of model that resonates globally, especially in regions that are still struggling to bridge the digital divide. In exporting such solutions, India is not only trading in technology but in ideas that suggest development can be both ambitious and equitable. Beyond the digital frontier, another dimension of India's evolving identity is in the realm of sustainability. As the world grapples with the urgency of climate change, India has chosen not to sit on the sidelines but to experiment with renewable energy, green technologies, and new approaches to urban development. Here, trade is no longer about the exchange of commodities, but about the exchange of models for survival. By investing in solar power, electric mobility, and sustainable agriculture, India positions itself not only as a participant in the global market, but as a contributor to the collective future of humanity. The message is powerful. In a time when markets are uncertain, what will endure are those innovations that address the deepest needs of our shared planet. This is not merely economic strategy, it is a redefinition of identity. For too long, India's role in global commerce was framed by what others expected of it. A supplier of labor, a source of raw material, a back office for the developed world. But the turmoil of today has cracked open the possibility of reshaping those narratives. India now steps forward to say, we are not only producers, we are pioneers, not only exporters, we are experimenters. And this shift carries psychological significance as well. It speaks to a nation's confidence in its ability to contribute meaningfully, not just participate passively. The lesson here is profound. In times of uncertainty, it is not enough to protect what one already has. The true path forward is to innovate, to expand identity, and to offer the world something it did not know it needed. India's journey from provider to problem solver shows that growth is not merely about numbers, it is about imagination. And imagination, when applied with courage, has the power to turn a nation into a force that shapes the future rather than reacts to it. Every decision in trade today is no longer confined to the language of economics. It is entangled with questions of power, values, and moral responsibility. Global commerce is no longer a neutral exchange of goods. It has become a stage upon which geopolitics plays out, where each alignment or disengagement carries implications far beyond balance sheets. For India, this raises a fundamental dilemma. Should trade be guided solely by convenience, or should it reflect conscience as well? This question is not abstract. It is real, immediate, and defining. On one hand, economic pragmatism pushes toward efficiency and opportunity. It is tempting for any nation to partner with whoever offers the best terms, the lowest prices, or the quickest access. In a world where markets are volatile, such pragmatism can seem not just practical but necessary. Yet, on the other hand, there is the weight of values, the recognition that trade links are not only economic bridges, but also moral statements about the kind of world one chooses to support. Aligning too closely with powers that undermine stability or disregard ethical norms carries consequences that unfold slowly but surely. It shapes how a nation is perceived, what kind of alliances it can sustain, and how much trust it can command in the long run. India, perhaps more than most, is aware of this delicate balance. With its long history of navigating between empires, ideologies, and shifting global currents, it knows that choices made under pressure often define entire generations. When India seeks new markets, the question is not simply who will buy and sell, but what deeper values those partnerships will reinforce. This is why trade for India cannot be stripped of its philosophical weight. Every agreement echoes with the larger issue of whether we are building a world grounded in justice and stability, or one that sacrifices ethics for short-term gain. There is also a psychological dimension here. A nation that trades without conscience may gain in the short run, but risks eroding its own confidence in the long run. It becomes reactive rather than intentional, drifting wherever immediate advantage lies. A nation that trades with values, however, cultivates a deeper resilience. It sends a message not only to others but to itself that growth is not worth pursuing at the cost of identity, that strength comes not from bending to every storm but from standing with integrity even in turbulent times. And so, India's challenge is not only external but internal, to resist the temptation of expedience and instead cultivate the discipline of balance. This does not mean rejecting pragmatism. It means ensuring that pragmatism does not drown out principle. It means recognizing that economic strength without ethical grounding is fragile, but economic strength built on trust and credibility has the power to endure. The choice, ultimately, is one that confronts every nation and every individual. Will we shape our future through convenience or through conscience? For India and for us, the answer will determine not only the direction of growth, but the meaning of that growth. Trade is not merely about what we gain, it is about who we become. In moments of global turmoil, it is easy to believe that progress must be immediate, that survival depends on quick wins and rapid gains. Yet history shows us that the most enduring shifts are not the result of hurried reactions, but of long-term positioning. Guided by patience and clarity of vision, India's pursuit of new markets is not a scramble born out of desperation, it is a deliberate reorientation, one that acknowledges that meaningful transformation takes time. Strategic patience is not passive waiting, it is active preparation, the ability to endure uncertainty while carefully building the foundations for future strength. What does this patience look like in practice? It is seen in India's gradual weaving of economic ties across continents rather than overcommitting to any single alliance. It is seen in the steady development of infrastructure, digital connectivity, and industrial capacity even when immediate returns may appear modest. And it is seen in the recognition that credibility in the global marketplace is not earned in a day. It is earned over years through consistency, reliability, and the willingness to play the long game. Psychologically, patience is often misunderstood. Many think of it as inaction, a waiting game. In reality, patience is a form of discipline, a refusal to be seduced by the illusion of quick success. In both life and geopolitics, the strongest players are rarely those who move fastest, but those who move with intention, who measure their steps against a larger vision rather than the urgency of the moment. For India, this means that the search for new markets is not about chasing temporary opportunities, but about cultivating durable partnerships that will still matter decades from now. Philosophically, this posture of patience carries a deeper significance. It reflects a trust in time itself, a belief that endurance can be a form of strength. In a world obsessed with speed and immediate gratification, India's strategy reminds us that true stability requires the humility to wait, to build slowly, and to allow relationships, industries, and identities to mature. There is wisdom here. Growth without roots is fragile, but growth nurtured with patience becomes unshakable. This is why India's emergence as a stabilizing force is not only about economics. It is about psychology and philosophy combined. By resisting the pressure to react impulsively to every global shock, India sends a quiet but powerful message. Resilience is not about racing ahead of the storm. It is about standing firm until the storm itself has passed. This patience, coupled with steady preparation, is what will allow India not just to survive the turbulence, but to define the landscape that follows it. The lesson for us is clear. Whether as nations or as individuals, we must learn to trust the long game. Quick gains may satisfy the present, but only patience shapes the future. And if India can embrace this discipline on the global stage, then so too can we in our own lives. For in the end, it is not speed that determines destiny, it is endurance.